The Haunted Roundabout by Simplex. The Reverend Mr. Perkins, vicar of a large parish in the eastern counties, and chaplain to a society of which I have the honour to be a member, once invited me to tea at the vicarage. The conversation drifted at last onto ghosts, and when asked if he believed in such things, to my surprise he readily replied, "Yes, I have had one most uncanny experience, which has left no doubt in my mind that such things actually do exist. Some years ago," he continued, "the local flower show, which is always held in August, took place in a field near my church, owing to the fact that the meadow in which it was usually held had been sold. And the day before the event was to open, a number of steam tractors arrived, pulling gypsy caravans and wagons containing the dismantled roundabouts, swing boats, and other amusements. I have always felt that these poor wandering gypsies are usually not very kindly received, and as they were temporarily my parishioners, I decided to go down and welcome them, and let them know that if I could assist them in any way during their stay, I was prepared to do so. These sort of jobs are always rather uncomfortable. One always feels that one may be intruding, or worse still, unwelcome. However, these people seemed delighted to see me, and I was soon on the best of terms with them. The show, of course, only lasted one day, but the roundabouts, etc., were to remain for 5 days before they moved on to another fate at a town lying 14-odd miles away. I was particularly busy that week, but made a special point of calling again to see how my gypsy friends were. I found one family in great distress. The son, a lad of 17, had been the victim of a nasty accident while engaged in taking fares on the roundabout cars. The lad had slipped, and falling heavily inside the track, which was a drop of considerable height at that point, had broken his right arm and had been conveyed to the hospital. I was naturally very sorry to hear this bad news, and at once volunteered to go and visit the lad at that institution, which offer they gladly accepted. I found that the boy was a bright young fellow, and we had a long chat, during which he told me the reason for his fall. "Excuse me, sir," he remarked in introducing the subject, "but do you believe in ghosts?" I was forced to confess that I did not, for at that time nothing of an occult nature had ever come my way. "Well," he said earnestly, "maybe we gypsies can see more than you who live in towns, but it was a ghost that caused all this trouble." I smiled rather broadly at this. It seemed so absurd to think a ghost could be responsible for so serious an accident, but the lad wasn't going to be laughed out of his theory, and continued. "It was as I was taking fares just before we were closing down, about 11:30 on Tuesday, that it happened. Most of the people had gone home, and several of my cars were empty. Well, sir, I had taken the fares of the people on my 4 and was going to hand the coppers to Mrs. Smith, who sits in the cash desk just under the organ in front of the machine, and being on the further side of the track, I jumped onto a passing car, which was empty, in order to ride round and drop off in front of Mrs. Smith's desk. I jumped on all right and sat down in the car, when all of a sudden I noticed a man's body lying huddled on the floor of the front seat. His head was resting on the cushions, and to my horror, I saw he had a great wound in his forehead. I was so startled, sir, that in my hurry to get off the car, I slipped and fell, and that's how I come to be here." I must confess I laughed inwardly at this recital, but the fellow seemed such a decent, sober lad that I determined to make a few judicious inquiries. Of course, they all knew the lad's story, for he'd told them when he was picked up, and the roundabout had been stopped at once and the cars thoroughly examined. Nothing was found. I was now more than ever inclined to taboo the whole story, when upon the Friday morning my bell was rung violently, and shortly afterwards the proprietor of the roundabout, Mr. Smith, was shown into my study, very red in the face and clutching a dirty Panama hat. Having shaken hands, I asked him what I could do for him. "You'll pardon me for worrying you," he broke out, "but I'm in a great worry, sir. The roundabout is haunted. That dead man was seen in the car again last night. A young courting couple saw it, and the girl let out such a yell that we pulled up the engine sharp. But when we got there was nothing to be seen saving the empty seat. I'd have thought they were trying to have us on. But you see, sir, our Tom saw the same thing when he broke his arm, and it was the same car, too. Number 19. I was deeply interested, for obviously the man was in earnest. "At what time did this happen?" I inquired after a moment's pause. "I was too worried to think of that, sir," replied the distressed showman, mopping the moisture from his head with a gaudy cotton handkerchief. "But I suppose it must have been round 11. Say 20 past the hour." Although I believed these people, in fact, why should they make up such a tale? I still thought that there must be some mistake. "I tell you what, Mr. Smith," I said, after a moment's reflection. "I'll come over about 11 tonight and see if I can see anything myself." So with this arrangement we parted, and having spent a rather busy day, I had supper and about 10 to 11 walked down to the showground. There was the roundabout, a mass of coloured lights whirling round at a great speed to the accompaniment of some popular ragtime which was being churned out by the steam organ. Over the hills and down the valleys the cars followed each other in an unending stream, while in the centre the little Italian figures on the organ drubbed away at their tiny drums in a truly lifelike manner, while in a sort of ornate cockle-shell desk sat Mrs. Smith at the seat of custom. It all seemed so absolutely material that one could not for a moment associate it with the occult. However, I had given my promise, and accordingly, as the cars slowed down, I walked up the side of the track until I came to car number 19, and took a seat in the second partition. The proprietor at once saw me, and swinging himself up as the machine started, sat down beside me. I'm afraid we didn't say much to each other. The noise of the organ was too deafening for that. The people had mostly gone home now, and the cars were only occupied here and there by a couple or so. We practically had the roundabout to ourselves. The sensation of rushing swiftly up and down the little hills was delightful in the cool, balmy air of a summer evening, and I was beginning to enjoy myself immensely. We had been travelling in this way for perhaps 5 minutes, when Mr. Smith suddenly gripped my arm and pointed to the seat with his other hand. I at once leaned forward, and imagine my horror when I saw the body of a young man lying, or rather kneeling, on the floor, with his head resting on the front seat, and a ghastly wound in the centre of his forehead. We both leaned forward, impotently gazing at the apparition for some seconds in mute astonishment. It was so absolutely real, with the great bleeding hole in its forehead, and its face thrown into strong contrast by the dark hair and moustache, that I should have stopped the roundabout myself and reported the awful tragedy to the proprietor, had I not known that this thing was the body of no earthly being. Gradually it faded away, slowly, like a rainbow melts, and vanished. It was, apparently, an inexplicable mystery. The phenomenon had never occurred before that week, and certainly no tragedy had happened during the time Smith had owned the machine, and he had bought it straight from the makers. It seemed impossible to give any reason for the ghastly spectre which haunted car number 19. But the week after, I, happening to pick up the morning paper, read that a man had committed suicide by shooting himself in a roundabout car at the place where the gypsies had gone to after leaving our town. It appeared that about 11:25 on the fourth night of their stay, a man, rather the worse for drink, had insisted on boarding a car on the roundabout, and having sat there for some time, he suddenly, to everyone's horror, stood up and, placing a revolver to his head, pressed the trigger. By the time the attendants stopped the machine and rushed to his assistance, life was extinct, and the corpse was conveyed to the local mortuary for identification by the police. I had the final details from Smith Jr., who had been left behind in hospital, when I next visited him. He had a letter from his father which he read to me. The man's body had been found just as we all saw, kneeling on the floor with its mutilated head resting on the seat in car number 19. A photograph of the deceased, cut from the local paper, was enclosed, and had I needed further proof that this was indeed the same man, I saw at a glance that the face was identical with that of the spectre I had seen on the haunted roundabout.